Boys, we're back.
We are back.
Ben's
MG,
back.
let's start with you. So you're away last weekend on a little getaway with me. How was that?
It was awesome, man. Even it's just up in Flowerdale, which is it's about an hour from sort of where we all live. And it's just like this secluded property, which is basically it's on someone's farm, and it's just like a little one better. It's no reception, no phone, no internet, none of that crap, which is awesome. And there's fireplace, hot tub outside, which you have to heat with logs as well. So it's just an opportunity, literally 2 nights, man, and it's cheap, man. It's like $250 a night or something.
Wow.
And we try and go up there twice a year, but you just come back, you just feel a million times better, ready to go again, man. It's a much needed break, but it was awesome.
How was the hot tub?
It was good. I mean, poor Maeve didn't get to take advantage of it this time like she did last time because with little baby in the belly, you sort of got to be a little bit careful as to how hot you get.
Yeah.
But I got up in the middle of the night on the Friday night and like really put heaps of logs in so that when I got up at about 7 o'clock on the Saturday morning, it was scorching hot. So I had a boiling hot one Saturday morning. And then on the Saturday night, I left it freezing and I did an ice bath on the Sunday morning.
So hang on. You put logs in the fire, heats up the.
Spa.
Oh wow, okay. That's old school.
And I left
Fishing, yeah.
And then I left it for the Saturday night and did the ice bath. And I got to say, man, like it was nice sitting in the heat and, you come out and you're like, but when I got out of the ice bath, man, I was like, whoa, that's like,
Yeah.
I felt amazing, man.
Yeah.
But I suffered in it. Like that 2-3 minutes in there is obviously rough, but like definitely you get out, you do feel like a bit euphoric.
Yeah. That's awesome. Sounds amazing. And then Scotty, you were over in Queensland last week. How was that?
Yeah, it was good, man. It was honestly like what we are experiencing down here in Melbourne, but just a bit warmer. It was like 25, 26 every day. It was amazing. I am really glad that we decided to do it. And we'll probably do more of that moving forward, just spending a bit more time up there. But it definitely makes prep a bit easier. Just waking up, it's warmer, training, just getting some sun. I can see why everyone moves up north because there's a lot of positives, a lot of perks. Even just of an evening, having the bifold doors open, and you can just have the breeze coming through, and you can see the ocean waking up to it. And yeah, it was amazing. It was really good to just fill up my cup and just finish off these last few weeks before we get into all the madness.
And do you always stay in the same place and train in the same place when you got there?
Yeah, apartment at in Peppers in Broadbeach. So
Okay, nice.
yeah, which is nice. But you were over in Vietnam, so tell us, bro, how was it? We were all living vicariously. I have to admit, I was just a little bit intrigued in terms of like all the different things that you were eating. I was like holding on your story. I'm like, I wonder what that is there. Was it like the food was good?
It was amazing. Obviously, I've never been to Vietnam before. Went to Nha Trang. So it's like a beach town. And I don't know if you've ever been to like a Thailand or a Bali. Like it's the same kind of poverty/wealth there, but everyone is like super helpful, happy, welcoming. You don't get bothered. Like, if they want to try to sell you something, you say no once, they walk away. It's all good. And, you can really immerse yourself in the culture, have like the local food, which is super cheap. And then you can also go to like really, really nice restaurants on the beach, like rooftop bars and things like that. But yeah, it was amazing. I definitely recommend for people to go if they just want to have like a little bit of the best of both worlds too. So it was great. And the food was great. It was easy. Like
That's a question. There seems to be lots of photos posted of you guys just with random Vietnamese people. Were you just like an anomaly in every place you went into? They just take photos? What was with that? I was like, who's that guy?
Honestly, they are so friendly. Everywhere we went, whether it was a restaurant, a bar, in the taxi, at the hotel, we just made friends with everyone. We just had a laugh. They're so funny. They like to joke around. And we would obviously go back every now and then. They obviously remembered us. And we're respectful guys. We don't play up or act like idiots. So, and we give them good tips and we look after them and things like that. So they absolutely loved us, and we made some really good friends. Like some of the guys, we actually said, "Hey, afterwards we're going to go out for dinner. Come with us." And we actually got them to come with us for dinner, and we fed them. And yeah, it was amazing. And they took us places. It was so good. It was such good fun. Absolutely loved it. We'll definitely go back for sure.
That's awesome.
What was the flight time there?
8 hours.
Okay, that's not too bad.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad. And then obviously a small domestic 50-minute flight from Ho Chi Minh to Nha Trang. Yeah. So
Was that on one of those like castaway airplanes where you're like
Nah,
you can see the propeller out the window and it's going like that?
no, it was legit plane. Yeah, no, nothing dodgy or scary. Um,
Okay, cool.
and the traffic is
Looked awesome, man.
the traffic is chaos. The traffic is absolute chaos.
Mhm.
You cross the road, you make sure you don't stop, don't look, just start walking forward, and just hopefully I get run over. And the food was great. You can. It's all healthy stuff, right? Like it's all just basic single ingredient stuff put together. It's all good stuff. So yeah, had a really good time there. But good to be
Boys all
back.
behaved.
Sorry.
Boys all behaved, and I suppose the question everybody wants to know is Drew still single after Vietnam?
Actually, we've got to update you, but that's a story in itself. That's a story. Yeah, that's probably a story for Suvo night, I reckon.
All right, cool,
Yeah,
interesting.
but we behaved. No one ended up in jail. So,
That's
Well,
good.
that's a positive.
so yeah, it was good. We had a good time. It was fun. But good to be back. Straight back into it. Check-ins on Monday, like straight into it. And yeah,
Well, man, not even check-ins on Monday. You got back and came straight to the A&B posing workshop.
I did. So I had an overnight flight Saturday
Yeah.
night, landed Sunday morning, 9 a.m., went home, unpacked, did a load of washing, had an hour nap, went straight to the A&B workshop, and then had to stay up because I had a birthday to go to later, and then I crashed. I think I told you, Scotty, like when I did my check-in, I had over 11 hours sleep that Sunday night
Yeah,
into
you were
Monday.
cooked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then good, ready to go. I
There you
weighed
go.
myself Tuesday morning, same weight as when I left. Not just all washed off, all good. But like,
Yeah.
your steps there are like 20,000 steps a day. Like it's
Yeah,
ridiculous.
yeah. So
But
you probably
for,
you overconsumed, but you also expended more.
that's
Yeah,
typically what happens. Yeah, they offset each other. But on the flight, were you drinking a bit of water and moving
yeah.
around?
I had my compression socks on. We had leg room. I was getting up, doing, my movements,
It
drinking
does
plenty
make
of
a
water.
difference, though, man, in terms of just not holding any edema. Like
It does.
there's proofs in the pudding.
100%. Like you see, as you're walking off the plane, you look at the people in front of you, you look at their ankles, and they're just like so swollen, and you're like, yeah, that's what happens. That's what
Yeah,
happens. So,
yeah,
Man,
but they're also probably just finished polishing off a packet of original Doritos that's just loaded with sodium. They haven't had anything other than maybe a couple of beers on the flight, so they're just
yeah,
dehydrated
I
AF.
was literally going to say I went on a work trip to Las Vegas many years ago. This is when I, wasn't. This was in a previous career, and it was a work trip. We got flown over by Mitsubishi, and on the way there, I think we had like maybe 5 or 6 drinks, right, with our work crew. And when I got off the plane at Las Vegas, I felt like I'd had 40 men. I've never had such a disgusting dehydrated hangover feeling
Mm,
in my entire life. And it might have been six, let's say it was 6 drinks across the flight, but it was like the equivalent of having 5 times that. I've never felt anything like it. I remember getting off the plane and just like wanting my life to end that day.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, not good, not good. Um, but yeah, we're back, boys. We're back. We're back into the swing of things. Got so many questions. I kind of put them in some kind of logical order as I try to do all the time. So I know, Scotty, you've got a jet. You can't stay the whole time, but MG and I will soldier on without you for a little bit. So just
Yep.
let us know when you got a jet off, and we'll just get stuck into it. So the first question that we got is a little bit of a juicy one, but let's just jump into it. So, what are your thoughts on coaches judging shows and judging their own clients? So, this actually came to light the other week. Um, there's there's a federation that's not in our state, and it's an amazing federation. And actually, when I heard that they were coming back to Australia, I was like, I think I want to do this. They've got a great reputation. When I was, coming up 10, 11 or more years ago, it's something that I looked up to, that federation. And then when I was told about this, where the judges on the judging panel are also coaches and they'll have their own clients in the show, that's when I was like, no, I disagree with this. I I can't see myself putting my clients in that situation where I know you never know someone's intentions, but you can never guarantee that there'll be no bias at all. So yeah, I totally disagree with coaches being on the judges' table when they have their own clients on stage. I can't even see myself doing that. I I understand that there's coaches out there that would be amazing judges. I think you boys would be amazing at judging. And if you were asked to judge a show that didn't have clients in, I wouldn't see any problem with that. Even for me, I'd probably go as far as, even if I was judging in a different state, but the federation was the same federation I have other clients in different states, I'd probably try to, if I was to judge, I'd probably judge for a federation that I've never put a client in, and I don't ever decide to put clients in. I'm like totally separate, try to like distance myself as much as possible. But, one day maybe when I stop coaching, I might see if I can get a judging gig. But what do you boys think about that? Maybe Scotty, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and same as you, I think that's something that maybe down the line I would consider doing, but I think you need to remove any kind of conflict, like with anything. If there was, like, let's just say that, I don't know, A and B were like, Scotty, we want you to judge, et cetera, and I've got 3 athletes in there, I would be like, I don't think it's right for me to do that, but I'm happy to go to New South Wales because I don't have any athletes that are doing that show there. I'm more than I don't know anyone that's there, that's fine. Same with if it was ICN or NBA. But I think if you do have that, even though I know that for me, it wouldn't, because of the person that I am, there's no way that I would want to, I guess, put myself in a position. If anything, I'd probably be more inclined to not want to, I guess, put my athletes forward for that very reason. But I think you need to be able to be objective, and I think you just can't have any kind of clash. I think it's different if it's okay if you're opposing coach, again, provided that you can be objective and you've got something that's quantitative in terms of how you're assessing the physique. And equally, it's not just one person's decision. But I think if that's the case, it's easy just to recluse yourself from the table, just be like, I've got a conflict here, so I'm going to step off. And then whoever, maybe it's a junior judge, is going to step forward, and then they'll judge that division, and this person can just step back. But otherwise, yeah, for me, if I knew that was going to be occurring at a federation, at a show, it would definitely deter me from wanting to put my athletes in that show.
And I think if I'm correct, it's not just one judge is a coach. I think multiple judges are coaches.
Yeah, see, then for me, that's a problem because you're removing any kind of objectivity, whether you want to or not. There's an element, and even if you are judging honestly and fairly, there's always going to be that perception. So from a business, looking at as a businessman as well, I think it's a recipe for disaster. And then once it spreads like wildfire, it's just, that's it. Like once it's out there, you can't really put it back in the bottle. So I just think it's pretty clear and concise. If you have athletes, and equally, I think you just got to decide, are you a judge or are you a coach? I don't think that you can wear both of those hats, unless it would be like, let's say, WMBF. I've never competed with that federation. I don't have a pro card, I don't have anything there. If they were like, Scott, we want you to come up and judge in Queensland, I'm not doing that show. Would you be interested? For me, there's no conflict unless I had athletes that were in that show, in which case, if I did, I would be like, I'm happy to judge, but I don't want to judge any of the divisions that my athletes are in, because also I've got a responsibility. I'm a coach first and I'm a judge second. And equally, you wouldn't really want that conflict, would you? And I think if you do have that, you're going to run into problems.
Yeah. What do you think, MG? And maybe we'll touch on, like, if you were a promoter or an owner of a federation, how that would be perceived and how that would look too.
Yeah. I was going to bring that point up. I think for a few things, like, if I'm the athlete and my coach is judging and I have the best physique on the day, hands down, and I still win, that would still sit not okay with me, because I know that people will be saying, oh, you only won because your coach is the judge. Right? So I wouldn't put my athlete in for that reason. But like, if we look at, the situation that, say, I'm in as a promoter, well, there are some very big differences, right? A promoter has nothing to do with judging whatsoever. You virtually will not see me at the judges' table at all day. And if I'm at the judges' table, it's probably because I need to instruct something like speaking too loud into the mic or too soft into the mic or something like that. So promoters have absolutely nothing to do with judging, as the owner of the federation should as well, unless they have been specified as a head judge. But for that same reason, you'll notice that it's pretty rare that I'll even have any of my athletes do one of my shows that I'm a promoter at, even though I have absolutely nothing to do with the judging. Sometimes, for that reason, I don't even put athletes in those shows. You got to think about just how we act as humans, right? Ultimately, someone walks on stage that you're going to assess that person maybe a little bit more, or you're going to potentially look a little bit favorably upon that person. And, maybe it's the difference between someone being, a fifth and a third, but it does have the potential to happen. So I think as coaches, I think we just need to say, all right, we stay away from judging altogether and leave that to a specific panel who has no association with anyone that's standing on that stage on the day.
Yeah. I think going back to if you're a promoter or an owner, you have a financial interest in that federation, in that show. It'd be really, really silly to bias the judging and for people to know or find out. It's just going to shoot yourself in the foot financially, because then people just won't do your show anymore. So, it'd be really silly to have your clients win, but then no one ever does your show because they think it's biased. So it'd be really, it'd be dumb of the owner and of the promoter to try to bias the judges in any way, because it's going to shoot themselves in the foot financially. And people will see it clearly. And also people will see, like, imagine all of a sudden MG or any of us, we had our clients in shows, they never did it well, and all of a sudden we owned a federation or were promoted in a federation, and all of a sudden our clients are doing absolutely amazing. That's clearly see it. But if our clients are doing well and then we own a federation or promote a federation, they continue to do the same as what they've always done, then there's no problem with that.
Yeah. And I think, like, even last season, if we think about last season, and I saw something that someone sent through to the page that came up about, one of your girls who won the pro card with us just because it's MG's best mate. But then when it went to win a pro card in every single federation and on the world stage as well. And it's like, sometimes people just want to talk because people want to talk. And ultimately, I understand that when you don't maybe live up to the level that you thought you would, it's really easy to try and find someone else or something else to pass the blame onto. Mm-hmm. So, the proof will be in the pudding. Especially the fact that there's multiple federations and most athletes are going to compete with multiple. If somebody is not even in a call out and then goes on and wins pro cards because their coach is a judge, I mean, anyone will be able to pick that.
Of course, 100%. All right, let's move on. Let's move on to some training questions. So I kind of want to blend a couple together. So the first one was, my coach has me doing 35 sets and I'm 3 weeks out. Is that normal? He said it's because I'm close to comp. And then there was another question about how do I get capped shoulders? I need help. How much should I train them and what exercises are beneficial? So I kind of want to group them together because if you have a weakness, maybe you might be doing a little bit more volume than other times. But, Scotty, do you think that 35 sets 3 weeks out is a bad thing? Is it normal? It sounds like the way they're wording it is maybe they've increased to 35 sets and the coach is saying, well, it's because you're close to the show. That's why we need to do 35 now. Do you see a reason for increasing volume or having a really, really high volume on it because you're so close to the show?
I guess context is important with this. 35 sets for me screams as a lot of junk volume. Mm-hmm. But if you've been doing 30 sets across a session anyway and you're just adding in an extra 5, I think resistance training at the back end, you're just not expending the same amount of energy. And I even noticed that I was looking at that earlier, like in the start of my prep, my workouts, I might be burning anywhere from 1,200 to 1,800 calories versus now it's like 600 to 850. And equally heart rate wise, like, unless it's a really heavy or high volume, big compound movement, heart rate goes through the roof and then it comes down. Like my watch has been waking me up in the middle of the night because it thinks I'm dead because your heart rate goes that low. Seriously, it's been when it drops below 35. And that does happen. And it's your body's way of acclimating to lower energy availability. Obviously, the lower your heart rate, the less blood it has to pump around the body. So as you start to be entering that state of lower energy availability, your body's looking at ways to be able to conserve energy. So if you're a coach and you're thinking, I'm going to offset that by getting my athlete to do an extra 4 or 5 sets, you might not be expending as much calories as what you think. Like in reality, it might be an extra 30 or 40 calories, which for the fatigue that you accumulate, if you look at the STR, so the stimulus to fatigue, the STF, ratio, then you're looking at obviously doing a lot more. Are you really getting that much in return other than just making your athlete a whole lot tighter? Mm-hmm. Versus you might as well, and same with like doing hours and hours of steps. I would rather just say, I want you to go and we're going to do an additional 15 minutes on the bike. Heart rate needs to be between 120 and 130. That's something that I think a lot of coaches don't specify on. Just do 20 minutes of cardio. But if there's no indication around the heart rate zone that you need to be in, because what happens is if I go and sit on a bike now and I think I'm going hard and I have a look at my watch, it's like I'm only really at 100, 105 beats per minute. So I need to work harder to get my heart to pump more blood around the body. And then as a result of that, I'll expend more calories. Whereas if you don't and you just give a set time, then you might only burn like 60, 70 calories. So intensity is very, very important. And equally with your resistance training, and this is how I prefer to do it, I would rather the quality of the volume that we're doing is at the very, very top end. When we're doing a set, we're working in close proximity to failure. Intensity is high. And so we know that we are switching on that anabolic signaling pathway so that we can ensure that we're maintaining what we already have. But if you're using resistance training as a way of eliciting expenditure, you're going about it all the wrong way. You're better off eating less or just employing a cardiovascular intervention, because that will get you a better return on investment.
Yeah. And remember, like the more volume you do, the more it's going to affect your recovery. And recovery is already low in a prep. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. So you have to factor in that SFR. So your stimulus. So again, on one side, this is what I'm doing. And then the fatigue that's accumulated with everything that you do, there's always going to be some recoil. And so that's where the art of coaching comes in. You have to weigh in, if I pull on this trigger, this is what I get, but this is the recoil that may very well come with that. And so, you need to factor that in. And it's the same with exercise selection. Like at the start of prep, you might have been doing 3 sets of deadlifts versus now you might only do 1 top set, and you're taking that to failure, and then that's it for your big hip hinge compound movement. Because you've done enough to be able to switch on that pathway. We're holding on to what we need to, but we're not accumulating tons and tons and tons of volume, especially when you're in lower body composition levels as well. And then you're also running the risk of potentially, wear and tear on connective tissue, tendinopathy, things like that you need to be mindful of at the back end of prep. And 35 sets is asking to have problems, in my opinion.
Yeah. MG, what do you think, if you want to add anything to that response, or if you want to move on to, if someone wants to bring up their delts, their shoulders, how much sets, frequency per week, types of exercises, that kind of stuff, where's your ballpark?
Yeah, I think to just jump onto Scotty's points, which he touched on right at the end, it was like, you got to think about what the trade-off is. And ultimately, if I look at athletes that have, run into potentially some back-end issues like tendinopathy or things like that, the probably common denominator is doing maybe a little bit too much or too much of a spike too late in the piece when there's just no recoverable resources left. It's definitely like one of the probably biggest markers or things that I see there. So the other thing is, and Scott said this too, it's like ultimately, you have to look at the context of the situation. If you were doing 24 or 25 sets and next week your coach bumped you up to 35 sets, that probably screams like a little bit of an alarm bell. And what feedback did you provide the coach in your check-in? Are you already doing 28 sets and you're like, hey, I still feel like I've got a lot in the tank? So maybe it's more an issue of your training intensity as well. And your coach is saying, okay, well, maybe let's add in another 4 or 5 sets across this day to see if I can get a little bit more out of you. But that's probably something that you need to look at within your own training. Personally, I don't think, as an approximation, I've really exceeded maybe 26 or 27, at the top end for someone who's that far out. And even then that's the high end, probably something more like 24 or 25. So it definitely does scream like...
And that's probably on an entire body day where you're including say...
7, 8 exercises, 100%.
Exactly. So you're not distributing that all across like chest, or someone's doing push day and they're doing 10 sets of a horizontal push, and then they're doing 10 sets of this, and
Yeah. And I think like a really good sign of that is, I've worked with some clients who have been on similar protocols to this. And, when I ask them about it, it's like, talk to me about what it was like when you got to the latter end of those sets. And the feedback's pretty consistent. It's like, well, I actually left a lot in the tank on the first 4 or 5 because I knew I had to get 7. That's like, okay. So now you're pre-planning to like, okay, I'm not going to go too hard because I've got to get to 7. It's like, well, are you just better off to give 100% to 4 or 3 and potentially get a better result and have more recoverability? So that's something that, I would say would need to be assessed. And I think that just feeds on to the question about shoulders. I don't think it's necessarily a matter of what is the best shoulder exercise. I think a combination of, multiple shoulder exercises across a couple of days is probably the best strategy. Depending on the person, something like, I don't know, 12 to 15 sets across the week. But really it's about, and Scott touches on this before, about the intensity. How far close to failure you're going. If you're doing 4 exercises of 4 sets each, and you're leaving 2 to 3 in the tank on all 15 of those sets, the issue is probably more your training intensity versus the exercise selection or the amount of sets that you're doing. I mean, I think we could all say that we've had athletes who have had phenomenal gains, probably working somewhere from 10 sets per week, don't even need as many. And then you've got people that you're going to push up a little bit higher than that. And it all depends on, how hard someone trains. But there's no magical number. I think people are like, is it 14 sets? I do 14 sets on shoulders. That's the magical number. I would say you want to hit your anterior head, your medial head, and the rear head on multiple different movement patterns, and make sure that you're training, I say at least 2 of those working sets on those exercises where you're leaving somewhere between 0 and 1 rep in the tank.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome.
And working within different ranges too. I think like the volume ranges, you may have, like everyone asks, what's the golden rep range? And really it's probably anything from 6 to 25, 30. So doing some heavy compound pressing, for example, in the lower volume range, but they're heavy. And then maybe you're doing some stuff in the shortened position with your lateral raises, and that's maybe in some higher volume range. And then maybe there's some in between, and all of those different bits and pieces make it up. But the other thing that I wanted to touch on with this person, if they're doing 35 sets, the first thing that I would say is if you're 3 weeks out and you are able to do 35 sets, you don't train hard enough, because, and that's not a dig at the person, but I'm saying the volume that you are doing, there's just no quality in that. Because I know and again, I can use myself as an example because I'm less than 3 weeks out. If I was doing more than 22 sets in a session, I think my biggest EB days, which have a squat pattern and a deadlift pattern, like I know after a deadlift set, I'll normally need 8 to 10 minutes before I'm feeling in a position to be able to go and go again. If you said you had to do 25, 30 sets on top of that, there's just physically no way that I would be able to do that, and I would be broken. And equally, that is what allows you to be able to train at the intensity that you need to train at. And that's the thing. I think too many people just don't know how to train hard, or don't actually know what it is. You might think that you train hard, and then you go and train with Michael Trimboli and you see what a set to failure actually really looks like. Or you see Michael Galanti on a glute drive and he just blows those glutes up. Most people stop at rep 10 and he finds a way to get 20. And that's why, he does a really nice bikini pose.
Yeah, that piece has been phenomenal. I actually, guys, for people that don't know, Scott gave me some recommendation on some equipment pieces, which I followed his lead and have been over the moon. It's amazing sometimes, man. I know this is a bit off track, but how having a piece that you really connect with, and you really feel like you're recruiting every single fiber, you just want to use that piece all the time.
Yeah, and it heightens motivation to go in and get that session done too.
Oh man, for sure.
Yeah,
I'll have to use it next time I come in.
Yeah, it's awesome, man.
I just want to touch on one more thing to do with that question is we've got sets within a workout. So, how many sets you can do within a workout. Every workout has multiple exercises, multiple muscle groups maybe you're hitting. And then there's also sets per muscle group per week. So I don't know, say you're trying to bring up your side delts, maybe you want to hit them 3 times a week, and maybe in total all the sets for the whole week might accumulate to 15, 20, 25 max. So, we're talking about sets within a workout and then also sets within a week for a muscle group. And depending on whether you're trying to bring that muscle group up or it's something that you're trying to maintain, it may depend on how frequently you're training it and how much volume you give it. But
Scott, do you get something like this? Do you ever get this? Because I know you coach a lot of males as well. Do you ever get people that come across and you look at a previous splits and you get questioned as to why you don't program a specific arm day? And then do you want to maybe address that now? Like,
yeah, I do sometimes. And I think, firstly, everyone's programming is bespoke to the individual. So, for example, the amount of volume, I coach both of you boys, the amount of volume that you guys both do is equally different because you both have strengths within your physique and you both have weaknesses that are different. So what you need versus what he needs versus what I need are always going to be different. But in terms of arm specialization work, again, if you're training at the right intensities with those smaller muscle groups like biceps and triceps, you shouldn't need as much volume. And equally, if you're training through those bigger compound movements, if I've got a pull day, I trained pull earlier and I had 4 sets of biceps in that, but they were both really, really high intensity. But equally, there was 17 or 18 sets of pulling based movements where the bicep is still being recruited, it's still being challenged in the lengthened position. So it's still getting a lot of that stimulus. So you don't need to have that unless there's nothing wrong with running a specialization block where it's like, I really want to bring up my arms. And so maybe for the week, instead of doing 8 or 10 sets of biceps and triceps across the week, that's the net volume, maybe you're going to do 14 to 16. So you're going to add in one extra day where you do 3 sets of curls, something like that. That's really all that you need if you're training within that high stimulus, because otherwise it's just junk volume.
Yep. The next question we had was, I think a coach has asked this question. I have clients progressing well, but sometimes I feel like they expect the plan to continuously change. And my motto is, don't fix it if it's not broken. So what do you guys think? Like, how often should we be changing something? Nutrition is obviously different to training. I know you can change nutrition more often than what you change training. But do you feel that sometimes clients like to continuously have things changed or mixed up in any way?
Well, for sure, man. I mean, it's fancy to have changes, right? And especially when you're in prep, you live for that check-in day, right? And it's like, you wait all week, you grind, you look at your 7-day average, you've dropped 600 grams, you're like, all right, I dominated it. And you want to log in and get a video from one of us that says, hey, you dominated it. We're going to make this next play to get the next move. It's like, you actually don't need to make another play because what we're doing at the moment is working so well. Why would we change anything, right? But I do think that changes seem fancy. And I think for especially a lot of first timers, the idea of, opening a check into a change is exciting. But I think what people need to understand, and the longer you're in it, the easier this is to deal with, is that the least amount of changes sometimes you have to make, the better the system is. And I was just having this conversation with someone this morning. Now, training's a little bit different because, you do want some new stimulus, but I equally think with training, and, I know how both you guys program as well, because I've worked with both of you, is, we don't change every single exercise every time we make a 6 to 8 week adjustment on a block, right? We change some different movement patterns. We might change a grip position. We might change a pull type. We might change a hip hinge movement or a rep scheme. And as Scotty said before, we may undulate the rep schemes. We might do something that was 6 to 10 and something that was 20 up to 30, so that we're getting, benefit from all types of rep ranges. But in reality, we just don't need to change as much as people think. And I think where people miss out is, and I said this to someone this morning, is what is really fancy is doing something, something that's, virtually the same over and over, really, really, really well and consistently. And that's where you start to see great results. Sometimes what happens is people get a movement pattern that they start to really excel at week 4, week 5. And then they're like, oh, when's my new program coming? It's like, you just got good at this. Your last 2 weeks of overload has been phenomenal. Stick with it for another 3 or 4 weeks. We're not going to change this pattern. You've just got good at it. And I think too many people change things too often and potentially are missing out on a little bit of progression because of that. Yeah.
I think also too is whenever you change an exercise, the first couple of weeks is just your body learning how to do the movement. You're actually probably not making any gains. You're probably getting stronger, but you're probably not making much muscle gains there. It's once your body's learnt the movement and is now efficient at it, and then you start progressing in that movement, that's when you start to get some growth. Like some people think, oh, change is good because every time I get a new exercise, I progress really, really well at the start and I get really, really sore. So that means a lot of muscle growth. I was like, no, that actually means your body's just learning how to do the movement pattern first and getting efficient at, how to do it. And then keep it in place and slowly progress over time until you just can't get any more. And you think there's some more and you try a bit harder and you get a little bit more. And then when you've completely, emptied the tank on that movement, then change it. It's about progress and intensity, right? Not about changing exercises all the time. For me, I don't really care how much variety I have in my program. I really care about how far I can push an exercise and how much I can get out of it and see if I can get it to the nth degree and get to the bottom of the stack, right? I was trying to load as many plates on. Like, I don't want to change it until I know I've given it absolutely everything. Then change it.
Yeah. And equally, I've had some great blocks where I've said to Scotty, and this is where having a coach who you can actually have a conversation with is important. It's like, hey, man, I'm killing this block. Let's add another 3 or 4 weeks. And Scott will take some feedback from me. He'll have a look at my performance and he'll say, yeah, all right, let's run it again. Because nothing needs to change. Because yes, we'd set, say, a 5 or 6 week time of assessment that we would have a look at it, but everything's going so well. We both agreed, I wasn't fatigued. I wasn't ready for a deload yet. We'd be silly to make a change, right? So we keep it running. So I don't think that there's like a perfect set amount of time that you need to change your program. But I think if you've got someone overseeing it and you are making constant assessments, that's the best thing that you can do.
Anything on that, Scotty?
No, you guys, no, it's one of my most frustrating things because you want to, if as you touched on earlier, there's an element of skill acquisition when you first exposed to a new exercise. So it may take, like, let's say the deadlift or an RDL, it might take you 10, 12 weeks to really like lock down on that movement pattern. And then now that you've solidified that, now you're in a position where you can start to really leverage some intensity. But equally, if you're changing your programming and your exercises, if each mesocycle is 6-8 weeks and then you've got a whole different block and a different phase, then how are you able to assess progression? Like, what you want exercises that you can create a really good stimulus, and again, balancing that stimulus to fatigue ratio, and that you can progress linearly over time. So if you can keep an exercise in there, in an ideal world, your big compounds, you want to have them in there for like 6, 12, however many mesos that you can. Run it until, you guys know I use the analogy, until we run out of runway, until we get to the point where, and people are just give up after 4 weeks. I've been stuck on the same thing. Keep chipping away. It's coming, or I'm not getting any progress. Okay, well, what's your peri-workout nutrition like? What's your sleep like the night before? Everyone's in such a hurry to change exercises or to make adjustments, when in reality, there could be all of these other things that are contributing to that lack of performance. Whereas you sleep 6 hours a night and you're like, oh, deadlifts are just, I can't progress anymore. Well, why don't you try for 2 weeks, sleeping 8 hours every single night, and then go in and do your deadlift session and tell me if you notice a difference. It's like, wow, I notice a fucking huge difference. So, okay, sleep hygiene needs to be attended to. So I think if you're getting a really good return on investment in terms of really good stimulus, you're managing your recovery, there's no need to change it unless you're in an extended period of plateau or the mechanics of the movement just don't really agree with you. And but otherwise, as cliche as it sounds, if it's not broke, you shouldn't be trying to fix it. And it's not always about going up in reps and in load every single week. You might pull 5 plates on a deadlift for 5 reps, and you did the same thing the week before, but you video your set and you look at the rep cadence, it's like, wow, even though I didn't take 6 this week, it moved so much better. I felt so much better. And when I woke up the next morning, I was a little bit sore, but by Monday I was ready to go again, versus the week before, I was sore for like 2 or 3 days. So that is qualitative progression. So you need to factor that in as well.
Yeah.
I think Scotty's got to go.
Scotty,
I was going to say, I'm going to have to jet, guys. Right. Time flies when you're having fun.
I know. Thanks, Scotty.
Sorry, guys. Enjoy, but I'll speak to you boys after.
Thanks, mate. All right, MG, just you and me, mate.
That's it.
Let's keep going.
Having fun so far.
Do we keep on these training questions, or would you swap to something else? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, maybe stick with training. I think it's just relevant to so many people at the moment. So let's just have a discussion on a few things.
All right. So this is going to be a good one for people posing. I think it's more so females, but best tips and cues for lat activation. And I want to talk about this more on the sides of posing, because, when we hit that back pose, and then I'll talk about it from a training perspective.
Yeah,
perfect. So when we hit that back pose for the females in, bikini up to sports and fitness, we can really see the difference between someone that activates their lats and can make them really, really flare, and we can see the difference between someone that can't do that. And we always talk about the X frame and us wanting to be, wide through the back, small through the waist, and then wide through the glutes and through the quads. So really trying to understand how to activate your lats is really, really important. So one of the really, really good tips and cues, which I got off a posing coach, which I can't remember who it was, is when you are actually in your back pose, so your hands are up, you're in your back pose, get someone to come behind you and push on your elbows under your triceps and push up to the sky, and you have to push down against their force. And that will help you activate your lats. You'll feel the difference. The only way for you to push against their hands that are pushing up to the sky is for you to push down against them. And the only way you can do that is by activating your lats, because that's what the lat pull down motion is, right? So get someone to do that next time you're in a back pose, so you can really feel your lats activating. You can understand the mind muscle connection. And then obviously on stage, you won't have someone there behind you. You just have to learn how that actually feels.
Yeah.
And then the second part of the question was about your glutes in your pose, right? So do you flex your glutes or not? This is something that I speak to a lot of clients about. You do not want to flex your glutes in your pose, right? So in your back, we're talking about back pose. When you're in the back pose, if you flex your glutes, you squeeze your glutes, you flex them, they may get bigger. They may look rounder in the outer peripheral, but they'll flatten out and you'll lose your glute ham tie-in, right? So what you actually want to do is you want to relax your glutes, push your glutes back to the judges as if you're just about to start like an RDL, right? Have a bit of a stretch in the hammy, glutes should be relaxed, you get the nice tie-in there, and then you actually just want to flex the quads and flare the knees out. So you get that pop in the quads from the back, so you get that X-frame, but the glutes are not flexed, they're nice and relaxed, and you get a nice tie-in. So next time you're practicing your posing and you're videoing yourself, give it a go. Flex your glutes, then relax them, flex your glutes and relax them, and you will see the difference on how the glutes look and the depth of the glutes, because of course they want to look at glute roundness, but one of the big things they're looking at is that depth and that shape of the glute and how it ties into the hamstring. So that's really, really important. MG, anything on activation of lats or glutes in a pose?
No, just that, yeah, with that one, if you think about just the glutes specifically and, contracting any muscle in that, extended pose, that lengthened glute, as soon as you squeeze it, you're going to obviously shorten that.
Yeah.
It's going to give away a lot of that 3D effect.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, again, it's individualized. Do exactly what MT said. Try it with, try it without, take photos, compare both. But I think you'll notice a big difference if you just let it sit there naturally. But in terms of like training, I think the biggest thing that we always see, and this is a precursor for things like tendinopathy, is people initiate that pull movement, whether it's a row or a lat pull down, and they just pull that weight, say, from their wrist or from the hand, without that sort of subtle initial retraction of the scapula first. So it's like I pull my scapula back slightly and then I finish the pull from the hand.
Yeah.
And I think that's where most people miss out of taking so much tension in the back. And as I said, it doesn't matter if it's a pull down or a row, but they end up wearing a lot of it in the forearm, in the bicep, and hence why we see spikes, particularly in elbow tendinopathy. So slow it down, put the weight down a little bit, and focus on having a slight retraction of your scapula first before you finish that pull movement off. And if anyone wants like a really slow demonstrated video of it, flick the Prep Coach page of video. Maybe me and MT will do something on it when we're next together.
Yeah. I always tell people in a lat pull down, obviously imagine you're hanging from the bar, like the lat pull down bar, right? So your arms should be as long as they can be. Your shoulders are shrugged up. The first move you want to do is unshrug your shoulders. Bring your shoulders down.
Yeah.
Then start to pull with the arms and finish the movement. It should be an unshrug of the shoulders should be your first movement.
Definitely, yes. Definitely. That's a really good cue there, is just start it from the back of the shoulder blade, not from the hand, whereas a lot of people do pull from the hand first.
Correct.
Use that. Start from the shoulder blade.
And you're right. So then when you're in a row, obviously your back is, stretched where your shoulder blades are. The first thing you want to do when you start the row is bring those shoulder blades together. That's the first move before your arms even move. Yeah.
Yes. Maybe that's the best piece of technical advice we can give from a cue for any pull movement. Start from the scapula.
Yeah.
Shoulder blades first, then row.
Then arms. Yeah.
I reckon we'll get some good feedback from that one.
Yeah, for sure.
The other thing is obviously like more specific to a lat pull down, just making sure that the angle that you're pulling back as well. Think about, best thing you can do sometimes is like jump on and look at an anatomy chart, look at the back muscles and have a look how those muscles move, because you'll see a lot of times, and we've seen this where people are pulling down and they're letting the shoulders roll down because they're pulling the bar in front rather than more of a retracted angle. Yeah. So it's always about working in line with the way the scapula moves.
Yeah, you should, in a lat pull down or any row movement, it should always end with a chest up position.
Always.
Yeah, if you're finishing a lat pull down with a chest down, or you're ending a row with a chest down and caved in position, you're just pulling with your arms. Yeah. So on that note, someone asked a question about glute ham tie-in best exercises. Now, I know we've kind of covered this before, when we talk about glute ham tie-in, it's actually the development of the glutes more so than the actual hamstring. So
Definitely.
the
And the
hamstring,
lower head of the max, right? So
yeah, it's actually the lower head, the lower head of the glute, right? So think of them as, to get your glute ham tie-in, obviously you need to be lean, but to train that muscle, it's a glute muscle. It's not the hamstring muscle.
yeah,
And think of it as, you want to put that muscle, that specific portion of the muscle, through its full range of motion. And the only way to do that is whenever you go deep in a squat, in
yeah.
a leg press, in a lunge,
Lots of flexion.
in a step up. Yeah.
Yeah. And then obviously, things like hip extension too. So knee flexion, hip extension. So like, obviously thrusts. But yeah, like, some of the best things for me are like, I do like a single leg step up, like a Bulgarian.
Mm-hmm.
They suck, I know, but they're definitely, one of the key movers for just, I think this is something that you and me spoke about years and years ago. It's like, all right, how can I put that muscle in its most lengthened position possible?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the target. That's what I'm going for. The most amount of mechanical load in the most stretched position is the objective.
Yeah. And if you want to try to bias the glute and not the quad so much, because all those movements are a quad movement too. You're going to be using your quads when you do a step up, when you do a lunge, when you do a leg press, when you do a squat. You want to try to take some of the pressure off the quad. And the best way to do that is to make sure that your shins are vertical whenever you're doing that movement. So your knee never goes over your toe. So if you're doing a lunge or a split squat or something like that, you don't see your knee travel forward. It's not going towards the toes or over the toes. It's trying to stay as vertical as possible. Step up, lunge. Even if you do a squat that way on a hack or on a Smith.
Yeah, and then you can think about feet position, right? So a little higher, a little wider as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
The other thing too
but there's no like magical glute ham tie-in exercise. As we said before, I think it's just a combination of everything, getting as much stretch as you can, and obviously training it, reasonably close to the point of failure and fatigue. So
yeah, definitely. And then the last training question we'll end with is thoughts of vacuums during prep. This is not vacuuming the floor like for your cardio. This is vacuum.
Honestly, vacuuming the floor during prep's one of my favorite things. It's just no, I'm serious. I do love vacuuming. How good does it feel when you're prepping and everything's clean?
Yeah.
It is
saying this to someone the other day. I was like, I bet you your house is super clean in prep. I bet you.
Always. It's like you're more fatigued, but because you're more irritable, you take pleasure in things that, in off season you probably just don't give a shit about, like, tidiness.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're Michael Trimboli, and that's just 365 days a year. But yes, I think they're a great tool. I think they're just great for building mind-muscle connection with the midsection, and a good way to also teach control through posing. So I don't think that it's a mandatory for everyone, but I think it's a useful technique that can be used by most, especially like when you think about transitioning through quarters and half turns, and how a lot of the time, a lot of that distension through the midsection we see in transitions, not necessarily in the pose. I think it is a useful tool. And I think that most people that practice vacuums tend to have really, really great midsection control.
Yeah, nailed it. That's exactly what I think too. Yeah, for sure. All right, let's move on to some comp questions. So when choosing your divisions for clients, do you choose it based on muscle mass and size or on condition?
All of it.
E.g. fitness is for muscle, whereas bikini is not so much. So when you make a decision about where you're going to put a client, what do you look at the most?
Yeah, so I look at all of it because it's, I suppose, different. We've been doing it a long, long time, and equally, we're heavily involved in not just the federation that we're part of, but we're involved in all the federations. We know all the federations. We know the criteria. We know what they're looking for. So muscularity is a big standout, right? If someone's going to be too big or too small for a certain division. And then, the levels of conditioning that are required are factored in next. But sometimes we've got female athletes who are, say, the muscularity of probably what would be right for bikini, but maybe get a little bit too peeled. That's where really, it becomes a question of, okay, well, what's the best thing? And sometimes there is no perfect division for everyone because, and we look at females specifically, sometimes, you might be super peeled from the waist up, but just not quite being in the bottom. And often as coaches, we just need to make our best judgment call to say, well, you know what, I'd rather be lean up top but have the right amount of muscle for division. So we're going to stick with bikini.
Yeah.
But, often there's times where there just isn't a perfect division, but sometimes you can utilize tools. Like there's a lot of coaches that reach out to me asking for advice on where they should put their athletes for A and B, which is totally fine. And sometimes even the judges and the promoters of certain federations aren't able to give you the perfect answer, because what a lot of people want to hear is your client is this division, but sometimes they're in between two. It's just the way that it is, because they're perfect up top for one and they're perfect down below for the other. But I think, from a coach's standpoint, we're going to look at muscularity first, and based on the amount of muscle you have, that's pretty much going to dictate what division you're going to do, followed by condition.
Yeah. Obviously it's really good that most of the feds allow you to cross compete. Fitness can go into sports, bikini can go into sports. They allow that cross competing because sometimes, people, we don't really know what they're going to look best in and what the judges think they look best in. So, you throw your hat in the ring for both of them and you see how you go. But one thing I would say is that for fitness, conditioning is going to be a big component of it.
Sure.
So, obviously muscularity in that division is super important, but you're going to have people that are just going to be overly more muscular than you, just maybe due to your stature, your height, things like that. But you can beat them if you're not as muscular as them, but you're leaner and you have better condition, better flow, better balance. You can beat someone that's more muscular than you if you're better conditioned than them. I think obviously the best of both is obviously ideal, but if you've got someone that's not conditioned but has a lot of muscularity, if you come in and you're a little bit smaller but you have better conditioning and you're more balanced, you're most likely going to do a little bit better.
And this is where the judges do have it tough sometimes. It's like, let's say like I'm picking out of two and one has, the right amount of muscle for the division, but probably just misconditioned. It still looks amazing, but just misconditioned. And then you've got someone who is absolutely shredded to the bone, but just nowhere near matches the amount of density that the other person has.
Mm-hmm.
That is a tough decision because you've really they both, meet the criteria to some degree. And that's what people need to remember when they get into this sport is some judges like one look, some judges like the other. So, often, you might have an opinion of what you think is the best, but, in a lot of instances, it is tough for the judges to decide when you're looking at two different, both have their strong points. So, and all the judges can do in that instance is go back to the criteria and pick what they think is the best on that day.
Yeah,
it can be difficult sometimes.
I think sometimes too, and we've seen this, is the judges will look at what the majority of the competitors look like and then judge it that way. So say, for instance, majority of them are out of shape, but they're all muscular and have great mass and size. Then I'll be like, okay, cool, we'll pick the best of that style of competitor because that's what we've got in front of us. But if you've got a mixture and they're all sitting in between, it's hard. It's tough. It's not easy. It's not easy. And with bikini, I think that if you're not in conditioned and you wanted to do sports or fitness, but you're just not in condition, I wouldn't jump in there. I would stay in bikini. Even if you're on the bigger muscularity side of bikini, I'd still jump in there. Because if you have great proportion and flow and your conditioning matches bikini, you can still do very, very well. So, Okay, so let's move on to the next one. Bikini competitors reversing into a show. When, why, what does it do? So reversing into show, what they mean by that is feeding up into the show. So they're not, calories aren't down, and then just carb up for peak week. It's more like they've probably been bringing their food up maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks before the show.
Yep.
What do you think, MG? You ever had that situation before?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you get the journey and process right, that's always going to be the goal. But I think what people need to understand is that how effective that process is going to be is a lot of the time dictated by how lean the athlete is.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm, shredded down to the bone, inside out peeled, reversing in and bringing food up into the show, you're gonna see the effects of that more than someone who, if I say an athlete who's at 6% versus an athlete who's at 10 or 11%.
Yeah.
Because, we're talking about the 1 and 2%ers here. But equally, there's a lot of benefits to feeding into a show. Things like just reducing overall fatigue on an athlete.
Yep.
And the ultimate goal of reversing into a show is the reduction of fatigue, but also to achieve glycogen saturation and bring in a really full and relaxed look on show day. So they're the two main benefits. I think the person who's asking is saying, well, if my bikini athlete is potentially not as shredded, is reversing into a show going to really matter? Well, it depends. That's something that you need to assess based on the athlete. Is it more worthwhile for you spending that last week of peak week, pushing the diet hard to come in potentially 700, 800 grams lighter of body fat than it is to look topped up with glycogen? Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if you're a bikini athlete is pretty shredded to the bone and there's a few of them around and your conditioning's on point, I would absolutely advise to reverse into the show.
Yeah. Yeah, reversing to show is, if you're ready early, right? If your conditioning is on point early,
Sure.
and you have the ability to bring food up. Now, you're not bringing food up dramatically. You're trying to maintain them, right? You're trying to just put a little bit more food in, try to maintain their look, maintain their body weight, and trying to, obviously reduce fatigue and give them some energy back. Yeah.
And like reversing into the show versus like carbing up for peak week, the goal is still the same, right? You're still trying to achieve glycogen saturation. One, you're just doing it a little bit slower and allowing the athlete to, eat a little bit more and feel a little bit more satiated as well. And the other one, you're doing it in a short, acute burst.
Yeah.
So,
it's if that happens, you're in a good situation, but it's not really a common thing that happens. Most of the time, people are
utilizing the last week.
Yeah. Actually, not a question on here, but while we're talking about it, and I know you have to go soon, do you ever do trial peak weeks, or do you ever maybe do some refeeds close to the show to kind of get their body ready for what carbohydrates is actually going to feel like?
Yeah. And again, it's very individualized, but I use refeed systems all the way through prep.
Mm-hmm.
And during those refeed systems, there's multiple reasons that I use them. One sometimes is, if we hit our rate of loss goal, I want to try and reduce a little bit of fatigue and obviously top up glycogen again. It can also be used to reduce a rate of loss, sometimes if things are going a little bit too quick. But I also use those refeeds along the way to take some data as to, what it really takes to top an athlete up over, say, a 2 or 3 day period. I never really do 1 day of refeed. It doesn't really achieve anything. Typically, I'll go for 2 or 3, and I'll take notes as to what amount we utilize and then what that translated to in a look. So let's say, I've got a male competitor who is pretty peeled, and, we gave him, say, 900, 950 grams across 2 days. I'll then get photos and say, all right, you look pretty topped up. How was the pump? Take some feedback on the session. Yeah, the pump was good. I feel good. Energy's good. And then we'll get back into a dig. And then that'll form the basis of, the numbers that I'll use when we get to that peak week. But if the athlete's ready, then I will definitely do like a 3-week out trial peak week. Mm-hmm. But again, if I feel like the athlete's not ready, I would much rather use those weeks to dig.
Yeah. Exactly the same page for all the exact same reasons that you just said. No surprise.
That's it.
Would you just do it mostly for someone that's like in a leaner division, not like a bikini athlete? Mostly.
Yeah, I would typically. I mean, I have used it on a bikini athlete before, but it was a very shredded bikini athlete.
Yeah.
Typically, like I've got a girl in fitness at the moment who I posted the other day who we've already done it a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
We've utilized some refeed systems just to get a bit of an understanding as to what it's going to take to top up the tanks. Because I think, we've had some feedback from listeners who have said, I got to peak week, we carved up, I took in 200, then 300, then 500, and I just never got topped up and I was still flat. It's like, could you have maybe assessed a little bit earlier? Potentially, but you touched on it when you asked the question. Sometimes you just don't know how much it's going to take to top someone up. If you haven't topped that person up for 15, 16 weeks, the body can just burn like an animal. So
we'll finish on this, but I had a client, I did a trial refeed for peak week recently, and they said that they felt like garbage during it. Like
just the volume.
They felt sluggish, slow, and they were hungry.
Yeah.
I was like, it's just the body just trying to just churn through it. And they looked amazing by the end of it. Like, I was like, this is awesome. They didn't look crap. They weren't spilled. I was like, this is awesome. But they're like, I just felt like slow and sluggish and hungry. I was like, sometimes more food doesn't mean you feel
100%. Like we've spoken about it before, and I'll just keep saying it over and over again. A refeed day or a refeed system or a week of higher days is not going to attenuate any of those issues that you're going through. Or as MT, we say the prep feels, right? 2 days of 500 grams of carb is not going to fix your prep feels. No. You're going to get through those 2 days. One, you'll probably still be starving during those 2 days. And then as soon as they're over, you're going to go exactly back to where you were.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, then they're not as, amazing and fancy as they sound.
As it sounds, for sure. All right, bro, let's leave it there.
Yeah, good potty, man.
It was good to catch up.
Welcome home.
can't wait to see you in person. I haven't seen you. I saw you
Yes.
obviously on Sunday, but it'd be good to
Yeah,
catch
so
up.
I'm not going to have you in my gym for a few weeks, am I?
No.
You'll have to come down and maybe just check those pieces out. Come
Yeah, I
here,
do. I want to check the new pieces of equipment you do have. Yeah, for sure.
come down.
All right, mate. Have a
Take
good
care,
one.
man.
Thanks everyone listening.
Appreciate it, guys. We'll catch up with you all soon.